Hello everybody, welcome to another State of the Nation webinar, and we have a very good friend of ours, one of our original webinar guests, and that is Mr. Bruce Whitfield. Hello Bruce, welcome to the State of the Nation.
And now I've got an inverter put in because the last time we did one of these, it was in the early stages of COVID, and COVID happened with load shedding, just to make it even worse. And so I didn't know what on earth was going on, but next thing, it all broke.
Yeah.
So now there's an inverter, there's backup, and we'll be fine, I hope.
Yeah, you know, it's things like that that have caused the hairstyle, the beard color. Yeah, the beauty.
You look like Father Christmas in training, Mike. You look like Father Christmas in training. It's in another 6 months and you'll be ready.
I look like Father Christmas' slightly younger brother, but not by much. But we've got you here because you're a genius, Bruce.
Well, I don't know about me. I don't.
Bruce Whitfield, genius.
It's no. There's Bruce Whitfield. Then the book title is Genius. It's all about other people, Mike. It's all about other people who have taken their smart ideas global from this remarkable place we call home.
Well, Bruce, let's get straight into it because it is, I know that when we last spoke to you, before the power went out, we were talking about the upside of down, which was your first go at this book writing lark, and very successful one it was too. The premise of upside of down is that a lot of good businesses come out of bad times, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, and the dysfunction of South Africa actually causes people with a solution mindset to create solutions to the problems that are created. So you don't have enough hospitals, build private hospitals. Oof, you need to fund private hospitals, build medical aid. For example, you don't have sufficient police, or there's so much inequality in South Africa that there's a high level of crime. So therefore you need to fight the crime. Well, there are 3 private security guards for every police officer in South Africa. They're better armed, better trained, and robbed less often. So, you know, again, solutions to problems in our country are created from the private sector.
And in some cases, we've even got police stations guarded by security companies, which I'll tell you, that is a story you cannot tell in any other country. They will not believe you if you had to go and tell them that. But a wonderful South Africanism it is. But Bruce, you have outlined some wonderful cases of some genius thinking in South Africa, business-wise, where people have seek to plug the gap.
And, sorry, Mike. You paused, and so whenever there's a gap, it's like my dog. If you leave a gap this big in the door, it's going to come in or escape out the garden gate and chase it down the road. He's learned from me. Absolutely, because I think through a mixture of necessity, frustration, and boredom waiting for things to work better, I think South Africans have got off their backsides and created the solutions to many of the problems we face.
Yeah, I think we've got to add into that too. We've had nearly 80 years of nationalist governments, you know, that really have operated in the most anti-business environment.
You've said we're not going to take this political, but we can go there if you want to.
We will. Bruce, I think many of the people that are here today will expect me to take it political, and we will. But let's first look at some of the wonderful examples. And I mean, what I would urge everybody is get a copy of this book, because it does read very easily, and it's very interesting, and it does help you as a South African understand that, hang on, a lot of success comes out of South Africa. And you've looked historically, going all the way back to the mining days, and even where we are today, it all really starts with mining in this country.
Absolutely. I mean, go back to Mapungubwe, and probably further back as well. We've been mining and processing metals on this continent and in this part of the world for centuries, long before George Harrison and the rest of the Beatles stumbled across the Witwatersrand and found a rock with gold ore in it and said, oh, we should dig holes here. There may be more gold here, and it turned out to be one of the richest gold deposits ever found, long before the kids were playing with this oily-looking pebble on the banks of the Orange River near Hopetown, that we realized we had the biggest diamond deposit ever found. Yes, those are modern-day, relatively speaking, discoveries of minerals, but people have discovered minerals and been processing minerals here for over 1,000 years. At least that's what the archaeology will tell us. But we've truly commercialized the opportunity, and the entire South African economy's backbone is built on the blood, sweat, and tears of previous generations of people who've gone and dug the holes and extracted the ores and the stones and the value from the earth over the last, particularly over the last 140 years or so.
Yeah, there was a wonderful comment that was made by Jan Smuts, if I'm not mistaken, who said that God must have emptied his pockets over South Africa. So, it has been like that. It's been a place where we seem to get all kinds of minerals. The one we haven't quite got yet is the oil, but we'll get it soon enough.
We get lots of natural gas, of course, if we're allowed to exploit it. It's there. We simply have to exploit it. Yeah, Jan Smuts may have seen the opportunity and the advantage of minerals, but Paul Kruger didn't. I went and met up with Robbie Brosen the other day, the founder of Nando's, at the fort. If you haven't been to the fort in Johannesburg, it's a magnificent site of history, and so much of our history sort of coalesces around the site. And the prison there has been home briefly to Nelson Mandela several times, Winnie Mandela more than once. And many opponents of the apartheid regime in South Africa, many people simply for disobeying pass laws, picked up and chucked into the old fort. And of course, over time, Joe Slovo spent time there. Christian de Wet, after the 1914 rebellion, spent time there. But Paul Kruger built this fort on what is now Constitution Hill. And in those days, without the tall buildings of Berea and Hillbrow, you could look down over the mining encampment of Johannesburg. So you could keep an eye on the Uitlanders, the Engels are down below, who'd come to exploit the gold. And he just said, this stuff is going to cause it's going to cause heartache and warfare. So Paul Kruger was terrified, of course, of the risks that gold brought. And he was absolutely right. Milner used lots of excuses to foment a war in 1899 to 1902. South Africa was torn apart by the fact that it was such a rich source of minerals, so much so that after the war, Louis Botha gave away the Star of South Africa, which sits in the crown jewels of the United Kingdom to this day, much to the chagrin of many. But anyway, sorry, this is not about today's business, is it? So I'll be quiet.
From the mining, though, Bruce, a lot of businesses developed, and it wasn't just the mines.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? You need a core industry. Every country that has been successful has a core industry around which other industries grow. If you look at Finland, for example, what does Finland have in abundance? It has timber. What do you need to process timber? Well, you need a woodworking industry. You need saws and heavy machinery and big trucks with clamps to pick up the logs and stuff. And so while Finland is a net exporter of wood and wood products, it's a far bigger exporter of the machinery required to process that wood and that timber and to get it cut down and moved and sliced and sawed and everything else. It's become the industry to support forestry is bigger than the forestry industry itself. And for many years, South Africa had a whole range of support industries, and they started out garage industries in the same way as Microsoft and Apple was started in mom and pop's garage in Silicon Valley. The sort of factory industries or the garage industries in South Africa were things like Prattley Putty, for example, which to this day is a family-owned enterprise based in Krugersdorp, but it has its origins in a garage in Yeovil, where Mr. Prattley Senior, the current owner's great-grandfather or maybe grandfather in the 1940s, started developing solutions for the mining companies, and it was figuring out ways to stop moisture getting onto electronic circuitry boards and things like that. Very ancient technology. But Mr. Prattley, I think it was Charles, created an epoxy which sealed the electronics. And you went, hold on a second, I'm quite good at this. So he started making adhesives and stuff. And to this day, I think Pratley has got something like 800 products, 400 or so global patents on the epoxies that it creates. And it's a thriving business, and one of the few to survive, frankly, as one of these businesses that grew up supporting the mining industry, because as mining died, of course, they diversified and had the good sense to continue in their globalization. So Pratley is one of those great stories. And we should have, I mean, one of the reasons to keep Denel and others going, for example, is the huge electronics industry that has gone up around that, the weapons industry, for example. And South Africa should be a manufacturer and exporter of great weapons out of the old arms corps and Denel stables. But these places have been pillaged to such an extent that they can't even pay salaries anymore. And that is tragic. You need great industries to coalesce around so that you can have your support industries. And I think that's what government is trying to do with the, I can't remember all the acronyms, but all of the programs around, for example, motor manufacture. So the Ford Ranger, which is built at Silverton near Pretoria, they bring in half-finished engine blocks from the United Kingdom, land them at the Ngqura port at Gqeberha, and then put them, believe it or not, on trains and get them all the way up to Silverton. There they get filed down and stuck together and bolted together, and half of those engines are exported to places like Thailand, where other Ford Rangers are made. But about half of the world's Ford Rangers are made in Silverton. The finished trucks are then put back on the ships and sent back to Gqeberha, put back on the port at Ngqura, see I'm showing off, and then exported to the rest of the world. There are some great examples, and 40% of those Ford Rangers are local components, from rubber mats to seats to the less technical components. So there is an element of it today, but certainly we need a lot more of those core industries to build other businesses and industries around.
Yeah, I remember there was even a thriving leather industry to make car seats, and that's an allied sort of service that will spring around that need. And recently we saw Anglo create this hydrogen-powered truck. So, it just goes to show that there is, business begets business.
Absolutely, it's all there, but geez, we need scale, and we need an environment which encourages that sort of activity and promotes that sort of activity and incentivizes that sort of activity. Well, every single month we go, oh, unemployment's high. Oh, shock, there's a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise to us at all. We've destroyed opportunities and jobs through a really narrow-minded thinking around what it is that drives commerce and industry and industrious thinking. And that's because we've made it too damn difficult to operate.
Yeah. Now, Bruce, we do understand, and it's quite odd because, whenever you see the weather maps on television, you see this kind of like green belt in the middle of Africa and, Europe very green. And then when you go to the north of Africa and to the south of Africa, it's quite brown, a bit of the color like this jacket. But yet we've always had quite a thriving agricultural industry in South Africa. And I mean, South Africa absolutely dominates in certain products, agriculturally. Now, you spoke to some of the people based up north of the country. Tell us a little bit about those.
Yeah, I mean, so ZZ2, we all know it. It produces between 1 in 3 and 1 in 2. So nearly half of all of the tomatoes that are consumed in South Africa produced by ZZ2, mostly in Mpumalanga and Limpopo sort of part of the world. But increasingly, they're diversifying their plantings and are working on that. So ZZ2 are very significant. But the most incredible story there in agriculture to me, or two incredible stories, is South Africa is the second biggest exporter of citrus in the world after Spain. And that is because of the huge plantings that happen in the Vaal Harts area, that sort of area of the Orange River, sort of near Kuruman and that part of the world. There's a huge irrigation program there. There's also huge citrus plantings that happen at Citrusdal, that's why it's called that, just north of Cape Town along the N7 towards Namibia. And then along the Sundays River Valley, Also, just an enormous area where lemons and oranges and all sorts of delicious citrus fruit are grown. And we are, as a result of that, a very significant exporter, but not a great beneficiator. And one of our great weaknesses, of course, is in the beneficiation of what we create. We're very good at picking the lemons and then wrapping them up in waxy paper and putting them in a box and sending them away. Whereas if you look at the Italians, for example, they don't plant nearly as many lemons as we do, but geez, like you think lemons were invented in Italy with limoncello and all these glorious products that are created because they've really learned over the years to beneficiate what they produce. And we're still very much of an export mindset. So extract the resource, whether it be in iron ore or whether it be in platinum group metals or anything else in terms of mining, or in agriculture, exporting the raw material and sending it out, whether it be the rooibos that grows so beautifully in the Cederberg region of South Africa, very near Citrusdal. You send out the harvested and dried rooibos, and it goes to companies like Ronnefeld and to TWG, which is based in Singapore. And then you end up getting back a little tin of deliciously flavored rooibos. I mean, absolutely wonderful product for hundreds of rand that was exported for like $20. And you go, hold on a second, we really have got to smarten up in terms of our beneficiation of products. And I was delighted the last time I was up the West Coast to come across a company called Carmine Tea. And it's two women, one was Car something and the other one is something Min. And they got together and created Carmine, which I thought was very original. But they are finally adding glorious flavors and blending the teas of the Western Cape in a way that I hope they manage to export and really take global, because we need to beneficiate our products more. But onto citrus, and it's absolutely enormous. But the greatest South African success story goes back to a guy called Hans Marensky, who was a geologist. And if you know your platinum belt particularly well, the Hans Marensky Reef goes up as part of the Bushveld Igneous Complex around the Mpumalanga Way. He identified that reef in probably the 1920s. And did very well as a geologist, but he was also a big fan of agriculture. So he bought a farm, the Westphalia Estate, and he set about restoring the Westphalia Estate. There were lots of alien trees and bushes and things, and he cleared all of that out and then started planting commercially agricultural products, nuts and fruit and avocados in particular. And today, the Hans Marensky Trust still owns Westphalia, that estate, but the brand Westphalia is the world's single biggest producer of avocados. Now, they don't produce all of those avocados out of Limpopo and Mpumalanga, but they've got avocado plantings in about 14 different countries around the world that enable them to deliver avocados 365 days a year to clients across the globe, because they've gone into carefully selected regions, whether it be in the Middle East, whether it be in Latin America or in sub-Saharan Africa, identified the best avocado growing regions of the world. And Westphalia, this company that originates in Limpopo, the CEO, Alk Brandt, now sits in London, orchestrating this massive global effort of avocados. It's a most astonishing story in terms of the global dominance of a once South African business, which is now globalized in a way that you wouldn't think intuitively is possible or likely.
Yeah. And Bruce, which sort of brings us on to sort of one of the things, I mean, let's just pause there for a second, because what it does prove, and you've got a similar thing in mining to what you've just mentioned in agriculture, and that is when the environment is no longer welcoming to your businesses that have been successful, they may remain here for the sunshine and all of that, but their businesses may immigrate. So now we've got that situation of Anglo-American no longer mining gold in South Africa, and more avocados being produced by Westphalia offshore than here. And those profits sure as hell aren't going into the local bank branch in South Africa.
Yeah, but I don't think we should, we can't dismiss that success. So Westphalia could be a local avocado producer, and that's fine. It would be, as it is, it produces avocados in South Africa. It's just realized that it can do it blimmin' well and can do it across multiple jurisdictions. So I don't hold that against them at all. Anglo-American, it choked. I mean, the gold is 4.5 kilometers under the ground, and people die digging holes in the ground in South Africa. So there's a reputational risk to them. But Anglo American is still mining platinum group metals here very actively, still mining iron ore here actively. The gold mining thing, I mean, Gold Fields disinvested from South Africa and created Sibanye, which is now Sibanye Stillwater. And Neil Froneman tells me there's another maybe 10 years if miners don't try and gouge too much in terms of wages from the remaining gold mines. But gold is a has-been industry. It's a sunset industry in South Africa. It's too deep, too dangerous, and too unprofitable to mine effectively here. But we have other commodities. And I don't think we should hold it against anybody who diversifies and goes global. In fact, I think we should encourage it. Yes, those profits don't come here, but what we need to encourage in South Africa is the beneficiation of product. I mean, every single minerals minister who's ever been appointed, I don't know if Gwede has said it yet, but he'll get there eventually. Oh, no, we must beneficiate. And government ministers say things like, once they've said it, it happens. And what we've learned is that it doesn't. There isn't a doing fairy that happens. I don't know if you've ever been to the Rodin sculpture garden in Paris. It's a bit cultural for you, I think, Mike. I don't know. It's on the road. You've been to Paris.
I was just thinking about that the other day, Bruce, to be honest.
There we go. Now, do you know that Rodin actually sculpted 2 of those statues? One is called the Thinker, and the other is called the Doer. Now, nobody's ever seen the sculpture of the Doer, because no sooner had he finished sculpting it, it got up and buggered off and got busy. And it's been doing stuff ever since. The Thinker's still sitting there dreaming about the future. And that's the big difference between public and private sector in South Africa, frankly. The public sector seems to think that if you talk about it, it happens. And the private sector goes, well, actually, we make it happen. I mean, a thought without an action is a thought, and it's completely and utterly worthless until somebody actually acts on it. And that's one of the great strengths of the South African private sector, is because without that ecosystem of support, you're on your own. It's like you've been dropped in the desert, you've got half a bottle of water and a compass, and you can sit there and bemoan the fact that it's really hard and it's unfair and you should never have been dropped in the desert. Or you can use the gifts that you were born with, look after the water sparingly, and use the nighttime and the stars to guide you out of the desert. Or you can just die in the damn desert. And unfortunately, public sector ideas tend to die in the desert, whereas private sector ideas tend to, more often than not, tend to take wings and fly.
That might be why Rodin never ever sculpted the Comrade, because I think it's still a lump of stone.
No. Don't be mean.
And in fact, Bruce, while we're talking about desert and thinking like that, we could go through a whole lot of wonderful examples that you set out in your book, from SA breweries to the magnificent work that the Rembrandt Group has done with some products like tobacco, but luxury products as well. And they really are stories to be proud of, despite the fact that once a year Julius and his mates go there for a tea party. But let's set that aside.
Bluster and noise, ignore that rubbish, man. Oh,
yeah, we'll try the best to ignore it. But do you think, what is it in the South African psyche that has created the business? Do you think we've got a unique petri dish that allows us to start businesses?
No, sadly not. I wish we had a unique petri dish, because that would make life so much easier. So it's not that. What else have you got for me?
Well, because I always wonder, on the odd trip, when you do travel the length and breadth of the country, especially by car, you would go through places like the Karoo, and there are people there trying to farm the place and have been farming the place, and you always got to marvel at their ability to do that. There's places far better, far easier to do it, but yet people have been doing it. Is there a stickability that comes from being in South Africa where things can sometimes be harsh?
A lot of people have no choice, right? You're born in South Africa, you have a South African passport, you don't have a visa to go anywhere, and so you better start thinking about the future and making a plan for yourself and future generations of your family, because you know that nobody else is going to do it for you. Something that occurred to me just this last weekend, in fact, was there is a huge amount of grit in South Africa that comes from scarcity. And allow me to just explore this for a moment. And I think what we can teach the world as the world goes into a scarcity environment, as capital becomes more expensive, as inflation rises, as interest rates go up, as borders close, as trust breaks down, as goodness knows what the Chinese are going to do next or what Vladimir Putin is going to do next. There's a huge amount of global dysfunction at the moment, probably the highest level of global dysfunction that most people who are having a look at this have experienced in their lifetimes. Not since the Second World War has there been a war in Europe to the extent that we're seeing playing out at the moment between Russia and Ukraine, and that unmitigated disaster is the doing of Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. And the consequences, of course, of that are causing food shortages and fertilizer shortages because Russia is such a big, sorry about the schnauzer, such a big manufacturer of, he's very vicious and could kill at any moment. So I may need to go and restrain him. But the issues around energy costs also having rocketed up because of scarcity. So South Africans are very good at dealing in scarcity. If you consider, for example, just a couple of industries that have sprung up in recent generations. So in 1990, there are two very distinct public healthcare streams. There is one for white people and there is one for people who are not white. And that is another 7 or 8 categories of people in the ID book, whether you were 00 or 01 or 02 or 03 in your ID book in those days. You went to certain healthcare facilities. If you were white, you went to better public healthcare facilities. Those all opened up very dramatically, of course, as apartheid ended and as the first democratic government under Nelson Mandela came in 1994. And suddenly there was this huge demand for private healthcare. There had been private healthcare before, but not nearly to the same extent. You needed a solution to that problem. So from that springs an industry to fund private healthcare, which creates the environment in which it's possible to build more private hospitals. And you see the emergence of Mediclinic and Netcare and Life Healthcare and subsequently other private hospital groups have emerged because it's an incredibly worthwhile and profitable industry to be in. So that scarcity of healthcare or the sort of healthcare solutions that were required by an elite in South Africa were brought about by a scarcity of public healthcare for everybody in the country because public healthcare had been largely ignored. We're seeing this huge explosion right now of an electricity industry and an energy industry in the face of 15 years, Mike, 15 years. Half of this government's tenure has been in load shedding. It's been half in the dark. Some people would say blinkered it in the dark, but and so it creates private sector solutions to the problems, and people go, well, let's work out how to efficiently provide sufficient energy for the economy in which to run, and the technology is making it possible, and it's great. I think scarcity has played a huge role in the evolution of really tough South African businesses. SAB Miller, you mentioned them earlier. What was their biggest shortage? What was their great scarcity? Their scarcity was markets. They were trapped in South Africa in the, all the way from the 60s, 70s, and 80s as sanctions, but they couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't do anything. They were trapped within the hotbed of apartheid South Africa, but they didn't sit and sort of wait for things to pass and then think about, oh, okay, good, Nelson Mandela is going to become president. The rest of the world would like us now will welcome us with open arms. All through the 1980s, you look at the literature of SAB Miller, they were planning the end of the Berlin Wall and what the consequences of that would be. And that would be the opening up of an African continent that was, of course, part of this whole Cold War ethos. And they saw lots of opportunities across the African continent. They saw Eastern Europe opening up and they saw China opening up. And these are very smart people. So your friend Clem Sumter was, I'm sure, part of the thinking process on this in terms of our friend Clem Sumter. He's lovely. Part of the thinking process on this and saying, hold on a second, but there is an unsustainable political ideology that will end. I can't tell you if it's going to be 1990. I can't tell you if it's going to be 1995, but it's going to end. And thank goodness it happens in 1990 as the Berlin Wall falls. But SAB Miller is not sitting on its laurels and waiting for it to end. It's preparing each and every single day for a decade before it happens. They're going around the world and finding the best talent and the best systems and the best ideas in terms of global brewing and preparing for the day that the Berlin Wall comes down and the opportunity set opens up. They send their best people to breweries all over the world. They're putting their systems and their thinking into brewing. I mean, I was talking to the CEO of Woolworths the other day, and he'd grown up within SAB. They'd even measured the tire tread on the trucks to gauge the efficiency of delivery. I mean, it was that sort of pedantic activity that made them the most efficient brewer in the world and the second biggest brewer in the world at their peak before they were bought by AB InBev, who've messed it up. And Maya Khan, who died recently, I found a video of him online the other day, and the guy who shot the video, once I played the audio on the radio, actually contacted me and said, "Oh, thanks for playing my video." Maya Khan was like bemoaning the fact in 2016, it was the end of SAB. AB InBev had taken over. It was like a farewell to SAB. And he said, "I would never have let them sell this business if I was still chairman." But they did. But it was one of those great South African success stories. Out of the scarcity, they created the systems which they exported. They didn't export beer. They didn't try and do what Carlsberg and Heineken have done so successfully and taken Castle Lager to the world, as much as the world would appreciate Castle Lager, I'm sure. But they took systems and processes and people to the world. And that was their great export. It was intellectual property out of the brewing industry. Diamonds are forever. I mean, it comes from the 1950s. It's probably the oldest advertising slogan on earth. And diamonds are forever is De Beers creating scarcity in the diamond industry from the 1950s because there were too many diamonds, too few people buying them. So they encouraged people to put a diamond on their beloved's ring finger, and the rest is history. Diamonds became a girl's best friend, according to Marilyn Monroe, because those movies were funded in part by De Beers and De Beers advertising and support. Elizabeth Taylor didn't own those diamonds that she kept wearing through the 50s and 60s, I don't think. I'm sure they were loaned to her, many of them anyway. And so we've got these great, there was a scarcity of customers for De Beers. So they created customers. They invented customers by creating the myth that you had to spend 2 or 3 months' salary on a diamond ring, otherwise you did not care enough. And this was part of a deliberate advertising strategy and a deliberate program. So out of the scarcity of that, out of the scarcity of customers, they created customers. And the statistics are astonishing that over decades, for example, when Japan started sort of participating more in the Western world, within a decade and a half, it had gone from like 10 or 15% of young Japanese women getting a diamond engagement ring. It went up to something like 80% or something insane, because everybody just believed that you had to have a diamond because a diamond is forever and this relationship is forever. And if you don't get a big enough diamond, well, then you don't love her nearly enough. Oh, my goodness me, the pressure. But that's all a myth of advertising and the invention of some very, very creative minds. It is truly is genius, like the title suggests.
Title. Bruce, I want to pick up on something that you were talking about earlier, and that was when you were talking about the SA breweries thinking back in the 80s. And it was quite clear to them that something had to give in South Africa, and as you've alluded to, I've done much work with Clem Santa, and you basically had the high road, low road, right? Either South Africa was going to go into a civil war and go pop. We're all going to leave with a shirt on our back, a la the DRC or Angola, places like that, or we're going to have a negotiated settlement, and then we would be open for business. Do you not feel, because you obviously do a lot of speaking to a lot of people, both on your show and informally, that South Africa is approaching another moment of a high road, low road, as far as our economy goes?
There's absolutely no question about it, Mike. And
but nobody's doing any scenario planning around it right now.
I don't know about nobody. I think there's a huge amount of fear and trepidation about the future, and I'm not aware. I mean, again, Clem has other things on his mind, I suppose. But this takes a huge amount of intellectual rigor in order to create the high and low scenarios. And there are people who dabble in this sort of in the stuff, but not to the extent that perhaps Clem did very scientifically all that time ago. But yeah, so South Africa, I mean, if it's, I'm sitting very comfortably on a very solid surface because I don't have my chair stuffed with banknotes. And I don't have herds of cattle and buffalo that I can sell for cash from the backyard, because one, that would be illegal. Two, I don't have a herd of cattle. And so that's, we go through these very, very high levels of disappointment. Of course, we've got a reforming president, a reformist president, or at least somebody who styles himself like that, and has made some remarkable progress. I mean, I think we often forget when we get frustrated and we lie awake in the long, dark nights of winter as we fret about the future, we think that we've made no progress. I would disagree with that fundamentally. I think we've made some quite astonishing progress, and progress that in 2016, I don't know anybody would have betted that we would have made as much progress in terms of the Zondo Commission, in terms of the cases that are being built, in terms of the court appearances of some fairly unsalubrious characters who make up part of our public and social fabric. And the fact that Jacob Zuma went to jail for a couple of weeks is, I still find, nothing short of remarkable. The fact that Arthur Fraser illegally, went against the advice of the parole board and released Jacob Zuma because he is his, in his pocket or in his camp, or whatever you want to call it, is, again, no surprise to me, because we understand that South Africa works in weird and mysterious ways. Are we headed for a high-low road, low road scenario? I think we are. I think we are headed towards a fractious period in our politics, and it's got worse and worse and worse, and it has to, because it has to break. This current environment is not working for anybody. It's not working for poor people. It's not working for rich people. It's not working for the middle class. It's working for nobody. So when politics goes like that, then it breaks. We've just seen in the last couple of days, Colombia get a very left-wing government. We're seeing Europe go more and more right-wing. We see this huge fractiousness in the United States. I was in Davos recently, and a bit like somebody who's got an MBA, people who've gone to Davos tell you they've gone to Davos. I was in Davos recently and participating in lots of discussions and watching discussions and absorbing the real fear of the rich world as they look into the crystal ball of Davos. And Davos tries to provide that sort of environment in which you can challenge the future and question the future. And this real fear of high interest rates and high inflation, purely from a position of self-interest. They haven't yet, the people at Davos, I think, taken the leap to say, do we start seeing radical swings to the right and radical swings to the left? Certainly one of the topics of discussion which surprised me at Davos, it was quite brief. It was a question to Ray Dalio, well-known businessman, author, podcaster. Don't know how he fits it all into one day, but he is got quite a remarkable mind on him. Somebody in an audience said to him, what are the odds of America going into civil war? Now, I don't know if you've ever considered that as a possibility, but Ray Dalio sits for a moment and goes, yeah, about 50-50. You go, what? What? Are you completely and utterly mad? And then you go back to the 6th of January, just last year, by the way, the 6th of January last year, when 5,000 people armed to the teeth go and invade the US Capitol. They climb over the barricades. They go in, they put their feet on the desks. I mean, they're like the dog that caught the bus, ultimately, because they don't quite know what to do with themselves once they're in, but they get in and they actually invade the US Capitol. And ultimately, the security forces come in and take control, and people are put on trial and gone to jail, and, there are consequences. But the fact that that could happen is kind of weird. And, and just you listen to Donald Trump's sort of rhetoric around the uprising and his election loss, and he's still not giving up on the fact that he had the election stolen from him in his mind. And Joe Biden, bless him, doesn't cover himself in glory. He's maybe the right values for the job, but the wrong guy for the job. And Kamala Harris isn't being much support to him either. So unfortunately, you've got a really fractured environment in the United States. You've got a growth of the right wing coming through in large parts of Europe. You're seeing big swings and roundabouts across the globe. And for a long time, we haven't seen this level of division and this challenging of ideas. But, I think all generations go through it at some point or other. And we just haven't had to face up to, as our generation and sort of the Gen X, Y, Z, whatever we are, generations haven't had to face up to real change. We haven't had significant change. But the global system isn't working well enough for enough people for it to hold together. So yeah, things have to change, and they will change, either for good or for bad. I don't know. But ultimately, humanity bumbles through these periods of enormous change, and ultimately we come out with a new consensus at the end of it, hopefully without too much bloodshed and pain and agony. But we haven't had a reworking of the global compact for an awfully long time. I don't think since the end of World War II.
But it may not be as spectacular as what we think. In fact, I think if you sort of look at what could happen in the US, I don't think they have the appetite.
Oh no, I agree with you. No, absolutely.
But
I agree with you.
A tremendous ideological civil war, which we're busy seeing at the moment.
Yeah,
but what I really want to focus on is, because obviously we've got a whole lot of very anxious people that have joined us today. And South Africa is on the cusp. There's a change that is going to happen, right? And now with the whole sort of couch stuffing situation, it makes the current president's tenure untenable. There's no doubt about it. And it probably puts even more pressure on the ANC going forward.
Good.
Right, which is good. And they probably have no mechanism to deal with it. I think we've seen where they have lost power significantly, they just have no fight back. This isn't 2016 where they could fight back.
Once you've swept enough stuff under the carpet becomes lumpy like a stuffed couch. Yeah. There's no more room under the carpet. And so you can't keep pretending it's not happening. And our biggest risk is 75% youth unemployment. Our biggest risk is a loss of hope. Our biggest risk is that sense you wake up in the morning and why is today going to be better than yesterday? Because yesterday was rubbish. Sorry, I nearly said a bad word. Yesterday was horrible. Today is lousy. And there's no prospect of tomorrow being better. Now, when you're in that sort of scenario for long enough, either you capitulate and you then develop some bad personal habits and you numb your pain in whatever way you can. And that's one of the big reasons why dysfunctional societies have got such high levels of drug addiction and alcohol abuse and all of that sort of stuff, as we see in South Africa in many communities. Or you get hurtful and you get some friends together and you start taking action. Now, we've seen isolated vigilante action happening. We see isolated, thank goodness, it's only isolated, but it could get worse of xenophobia. That's when resources are scarce. People fight over resources. And somehow we've got to harness that scarcity for good. In the same way as the private sector has harnessed that scarcity for good and for gain, we somehow have to harness the scarcity in South Africa for growth and opportunity, because if we don't provide the growth and opportunity, people are going to look for it elsewhere. And it's not going to be a productive search.
I do want to put it to you in slightly, because I was there and very active in the stock market at the time in the early 90s, where you couldn't find a bull anywhere on South Africa, right? We were having terrible violence in the KZN Midlands. Chris Hani had been assassinated. The whole thing looked too terrible for words, but yet the economy broke hard to the upside, right? And and if you look at it now with the benefit of hindsight, is that the downside suited nobody. And that's more or less what you're saying now.
Absolutely. And Elon Musk, for all of his weirdness, I was watching a video of him the other day sort of saying, we talk about sustainable energy and green energy. And here's the thing about sustainability is if it's sustainable, then it continues. If it's unsustainable, then it fails. It's unsustainable. It can't work. It's not logical to pursue unsustainable outcomes. And this is where I go to put my upside of down hat. And I say, ultimately, cool and calm heads prevail. There is this most delicious undercurrent in South Africa right now of hurtfulness, which is not translatable into any other language in the galaxy. And it is a deep disappointment and frustration, but it's a particularly South African thing. But where it's where it's transpiring is interesting. So we're seeing quite a lot of populist support for Herman Mashaba, who is making lots of noises, and whether or not he's ever going to be an effective, a long-term leader for the future, I don't know. But some smart people like Athol Trollip have left the DA and have gone to join him, and there's been a shift of some of the best people in the DA into Herman Mashaba's camp, which I find interesting. I see Songezo Zibi, who is a former public relations guy who became the editor of Business Day, spent some time at APSA working in the trenches
and
there.
soon to be a guest on the State of the Nation.
And soon to be a guest, and a very wise choice as well, because his book Manifesto, I haven't yet been able to get my teeth into it, but from what I see is he's painting, you talk about scenario planning, and I think Songezo is part of a new generation of thinkers for the future of South Africa, trying to define a new kind of social compact, trying to define how do we get through this together? Because it's in nobody's interest that the place goes down in flames. It is in absolutely nobody's interest that we keep fighting with each other and bickering and arguing and having noisy fights and throwing things around Parliament and getting chucked out of Parliament and theatrics and nonsense, because that does nobody any good. The only thing that does anybody any good is creating an environment in which smart people are able to be successful. Smart people being successful allow them to grow, in which case they have to employ people. Those people have to earn salaries and pay some taxes. Oh my goodness gracious me, the flywheel of South Africa begins to turn if you're not constantly navel gazing and looking. And that was the great opportunity of the early 1990s that in retrospect is perfectly logical, at the time seemed impossible. That, hold on a second, somebody with a vision goes, okay, guys, this far and no further. Everybody calm down, dry your legs, let us build. And lock up the bad guys and, throw away the keys if you must, and harness the skills and the integrity and the brilliance of so many South Africans, as what I've tried to illustrate in Genius, exists and is palpable and is real. There's a huge amount of intellectual capacity in South Africa that wants to make this country work. And, there is a huge amount of global goodwill for South Africa to work. The hope of the Rainbow Nation, the nation miracle, is sort of the candle is flickering a little bit, but you want that flame to take hold once again, to say, look, guys, actually, when we've got our backs to the wall, it's often the time at which we are most productive, most thorough, and most considered. And for all of the noise that is around us at the moment and all of the fighting, and it's only going to get louder in these last 6 months of the year up until the ANC's elective conference. We've got a policy conference coming in July. It's going to be can I use a bad word? Because I have to. I've been very restrained. Ahead. It's going to be a shit fight. It's going to be a shit fight. My dad died last year, so he's not here to judge. It's going to be a fight for the scraps. And we have to... what's his name? Yuval Noah Harari, Israeli academic, wrote *Sapiens*, and he goes, your peace of mind comes from knowing what to ignore. And your biggest skill in South Africa, possibly the world today, because the world is a fractious place, is knowing what to ignore. Ignore the noise of the ANC. It is like two bull terriers that have had one bone thrown to them, and they're going to fight each other until one of them can't breathe anymore. And then the bloody pulp of the remains is going to sit licking at the bone and going, I got the bone. Big bloody deal. Ignore the noise. Let these guys fight it out themselves. It's their mess. Let them sort it out. And I think the rest of us have to focus very intently on creating opportunities for the future, because nobody else is going to do it for us.
Bruce, I recently wrote a piece that the ANC is like two bald men fighting over a comb. So let them fight over the comb. I've got a bit of experience.
Did you get caught in the middle of that one? Yeah.
I did. Sorry, I've lost my comb, so that's fine.
I'm joining you shortly. It looks impressive from the front. I won't show you the back.
I do want to say that the one thing that I got from your book was that. Having lived through the period, there was a lot of growth of entrepreneurial spirit in South Africa in the early 90s, when the country was at its peak instability. And I think we're heading for another period. And right now, as much as it pains me to say it, I'm quite bullish on the country's economy.
I agree, because what we need is solutions to problems. And there is no better mindset than one that is against the wall, one that is afraid, one that is where there is scarcity of hope. And I look at some of the smart people, and again, we've spoken about, old white guys who created businesses 50, 60 years ago, but there's a new generation of incredibly capable young entrepreneurs of all colors, shades, and hues of genders, and a mix of absolutely everything that the world has to offer in South Africa, who are building remarkable businesses for the future. Remarkable businesses.
Smart South African minds get out of the clutches of the government and out of corporates.
No, but see, okay, out of the clutches of government, we need to break that as well. We're not in the clutches of government. We're not beholden to government.
About the people that are working there. There's some very smart people there.
Absolutely.
Some very smart people tucked up in safe corporate jobs. Maybe this is what we need to get everybody out there. But I would like to pass over to Bruce, who's got something to say. Yes, Bruce, you'll put your hand up.
I did. Look at me. I'm asking myself a question. Ken Owen, in the early 1990s, writes, I don't know how he did it. There was no internet. I wish I'd known Ken Owen.
We had pens, Bruce. We had pens.
I know, and brains, and applied them. But Ken Owen, one particular column out of many, 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 geez, like that, I did not like Joe Slovo one bit. He saw Joe Slovo as a sellout because Joe Slovo used to sit in business class. Anyway, Ken Owen making the point in the early 1990s, saying that when the Nats chucked out Jan Smuts, the United Party, in 1948. Most of the civil servants in 1948 happened to be English speaking. They were chucked out and they were told, go and do your own thing. And they went off and they created enterprises and created businesses. Ken Owen makes the point in these early 1990s that now the Afrikaners who took over from the English in 48 are going to get cast out, and they're going to have to go out and create some enterprises. They're going to have to go and become a lot more entrepreneurial. And look what happens. We see the emergence of some incredibly capable Afrikaner originated businesses in South Africa. The big ones are obvious. So PSG begets the likes of Curo and Capitec and Zeder and other great businesses, because these are smart people who've got nowhere else to go, who've got solutions for the future. So they create, and they have to feed themselves, but also they successfully grow enterprises. Capitec is the biggest retail bank by some distance in South Africa. Now employs many thousands of people, which before the year 2000, we didn't need another bank. There was 10 or 12 million unbanked people. And then there was the big four banks and Investec. And the guys who started Capitec went, there's an opportunity. The unbanked, well, let's bank them. And we've still got a huge portion of South Africans who are unbanked, many through choice, many who like the cash economy, it can't be traced. But we've seen a formalization of that, what the formal banking sector previously regarded as unbankable individuals being brought into the financial system. I mean, true entrepreneurial genius. And it's Skynamo, which is another phenomenal South African business from Stellenbosch. These maths nerds who are headed to careers in arms corps when they start their degrees in the late 1980s. By the time the early 1990s comes around and they've got their PhDs, there's no way they're going to be let anywhere near arms corps because the change has happened. So they create enterprises, electronics industries, and businesses that use complex algorithms that, with all the best will in the world, Mike, you and I will never understand, but they do. And they have global clients out of South Africa. A guy like Stefan Antony, who is, you wouldn't know him. He designs posh houses like I live in. No, not quite. But he doesn't take on a project for less than $15 million. Yet everything he designs, or his team designs, is designed out of an office. It's an old church that he gutted, and then Stefan Antony by putting big slabs of concrete and things in them. And he's created this space where there are about 400 or 500 people working, and they do design projects around the world. 97% of Stefan Antony's business is beyond the borders of South Africa. It is design, it's architecture, and he employs these professionals in rands charges in dollars around the world, and doesn't get out of bed for less than $15 million on any given day. And that is, using your local resources to the best of your ability. There's a guy who designs motocross protective equipment in Belleville, of all places. It's all made in China, and 97% of it is exported to the United States for motocross and for BMX riding. Because they choose to live here, build their businesses here, they can run them cost effectively, and they've got lots of really good talent to call on.
Well, to everybody watching us, Bruce doesn't do these talks for less than $16 million. So, Bruce, I have posted you the check. So if you don't get your $16 million, don't blame me, blame the SA Post Office.
No, thank you for that,
or
Mike.
Mike, I appreciate it. They don't make checks anymore. But
I know what I'll hold you to it, and if it ever comes, I'll deposit it in my bank account.
Please do that. But if you want to seem really clever at your next dinner party, read this book, and you can say, do you know that there's a South African that does something really clever, and you can make out that you worked it out, but Bruce has done all the work for you. Exactly. Bruce, once again, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much. And thank you for writing the book. We need it. We need it.
No, thank you, Mike. I hope anybody who does take the time to read it will really enjoy it. There's an audio book that is out as well. It's published on Audible and other platforms. There will be a podcast series. There will also be an online course on how to take smart ideas global. And then there is the all singing, all dancing, all razzmatazz corporate talk, which is focusing in on some of the key lessons that we can teach the world. And I promise you, there is so much that we can teach the world out of little old South Africa.
Now, look at you, Bruce. Look at you. All of these products. Isn't that fantastic? So book Bruce for your next talk. It only costs you $16 million. You can mail him a check.
I'll do it for Rand. I'll do it for Rand as well. It's okay. I don't mind. Not fussy.
But if that's a little bit steep, go down to your nearest bookstore, buy a copy of Genius, read it. It's a fantastic read. Bruce, well done. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to everybody else that has joined us. We'll be back shortly with another State of the Nation webinar. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Thanks, Mike.